As we pivot just for this next little bit of time, reflective pause together, just to ask that you close your eyes again just for a moment, wherever you are. Breathing in and out. Continuing in. Bringing our awareness down and in to the divine beauty of being. Simply belonging here. Together. Breathing in this moment. Breathing in not just an awareness of the concept, but a feeling, a share, full body, present feeling of being home. Of being home in this world together. Everyone. One. God, every day breathing in, we invite you. Kumbaya. Come by here. Be with us. In us. How privileged I feel, and I use that word privilege advisedly. How privileged I feel to be called by Dan to share today. In the prologue of her book, The Journey, Lillian Smith confesses, as I write, I am thinking of a morning when I was in the clay room at my camp, watching the children work. There they were, each with a lump of clay, smoothing, pulling and turning, picking off a little, pressing a smidge on, until it changed slowly into an image of something they dimly saw and felt. So gravely they worked. One little girl said, I am making something nobody in the world has ever seen. And when it was done, it was her own small face. She was right. No one had seen it before, for it was herself, as she felt herself, with her secrets spelled and misspelled in the clay. For the next few minutes, I'll aspire to share a bit, not a lesson, but simply to share a bit of my own life's little lump of clay. A little bit of clay that I dimly see and feel. I hope it might have a small bit of meaning for you. Indeed, what an honor to be asked to speak on the eve of our nation's official holiday celebrating the very Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One who was no stranger to these grounds, those grounds, Cosby Woods grounds, had we all been together physically. Being served at the lodge in March 1962 before his speech at E.C. Glass High School. What I hope to share today is really quite simple. It's not news, though it's born out of good news. It's not mine. Most of what I have to share flows from the clearly embodied, powerfully good life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and of other beloved servant leaders we knew and know. Indeed, what I want to share, I learned from watching many of you. And yet we struggle. We all struggle to get a hold of these simple things. And so it deserves our attention until we really do. 3 simple things sprouting out anew from my epiphany on Epiphany. 1, live in prayer. 2, love through action, love in action. And 3, cultivate our world by being, belonging, and becoming together. Epiphany, January 6th. It's 3 Kings Day, and also the day John baptized Jesus. derived from the Greek word, if I can pronounce it, epiphania, meaning manifestation. Epiphania, manifestation. It was both the first physical manifestation of Jesus to the Gentiles, represented by the visit of the 3 wise men after Jesus's birth, as Mark read graciously, and the manifestation of his divinity, Jesus's divinity, through his baptism in the Jordan River and at his first miracle for all you wine lovers. Epiphany is a big deal in Christianity. Up there with Christmas and Easter, it says 2 things. Christ, the Jewish Messiah, came for the salvation, not of the Jews, but of the whole wide world. And second, it proclaims the earthly oneness of divinity, or God, and humanity, man and womankind. It proclaims the earthly oneness of divinity in humanity. Non-religiously, epiphanies are big deals too. By definition, Webster says epiphanies are usually sudden manifestations or perceptions of the essential nature or meaning of something. An intuitive grasping of reality through something, such as an event, usually simple and striking. An illuminating discovery or realization. We've had an epiphany, all right. And yet, strangely, it's an epiphany this nation has had so many times before. This simple and literally striking epiphany of 2021 is simply another chapter in the old, played-out, hate-filled, fear-based, scarcity-perceiving story of American capitalist system. Our American capitalist system. We've seen this tragic movie too many times before. In the beautiful community video that Dan just put out and shared with us today, of all of you, of all of us standing up against racism, standing up in our and for our democracy. I know you all noticed Dolly and Will, so beautiful there, our own committed Camp Kumbaya lovebirds, both so gentle and kind by nature, standing firm, denouncing racism. And did you see Dolly's sign? Pleading again that we create the beloved community. That was Dr. King's life's mission. On April 4th, 1967, and his Beyond Vietnam speech, 44 years and 1 day before my oldest son Julian was born, Dr. King remarked at Riverside Church, "A time comes when silence is betrayal." It's certainly no epiphany to say that the time has long since passed to denounce American racism and fix the brokenness of its co-conspirator, our American capitalist system. And while the truth of these words is beyond doubt, we've had the epiphany again. January 6, 2021, Washington, D.C., just a few hours north of us, most of us, just a few blocks from where I used to live for years. The violent storming of the heartseat of our American democracy, like deja vu all over again in the worst new possible way. We had our national epiphany again for the whole wide world to see. And just a few days later, here in Lynchburg on the following Sunday, here on Boonesboro Road just 1 week ago, freshly in the shameful wake of the January 6th attacks on our U.S. Capitol, an insurgency against our democracy stoked by our sitting president. It was a tale of 2 churches on Boonesboro Road. On the one hand, on The one hand, Dan's voice, unmistakably not silent, laugh out loud. Deep cries out to deep. But just down the road, just a stone's throw down the road in another Sunday service with many of our friends, many of our comrades, many of our fellow humans, only a very subtle implied reference to the events of Epiphany 2021. January 6th, just a few days before, no specific acknowledgement, no direct enunciation, silence. Indeed, therefore, betrayal. And it's not just the Capitol violence on January 6th, but the continued systemic discrimination and violence against people of color and other marginalized groups that sparked protests in and across America in 2020, almost defining the year and overshadowing the worst global pandemic in a century. It's not just a few conservative churches, but we see now still in 2021, a great many people we know, many whom indeed we know and love well, holding on to hate. Likewise, many organizations in our midst continue to hide behind the excuses of uncertainty, the fear of not doing it exactly right, or the brazen old embrace of bold discrimination, cowering in silence. Since living abroad, I've been able to see more clearly some of the broken aspects of our little American world. That happens when we can step outside of ourselves. Our founder, Bev, talked about vicarious identification, stepping outside of ourselves to understand more than ourselves. Living abroad, let me see that. Two of my favorite epiphanies. One, Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. We all need it on so many accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. A century later, writer Lillian Smith said, I soon realized that no journey carries one far unless as it extends into the world around us, that journey goes an equal distance into the world within us. Where have you traveled? Or perhaps more confrontingly, where won't we travel? What word won't you care to hear? What won't you say? And what does that silence say about you, about me, about the world we live in, the communities we're committed to? Indeed, many of us resist traveling down and in to speak even to ourselves. Even if we travel outwardly, we often dare not bring the outward lesson down and into our hearts, where the real work can only happen first. Like an evil outer armor, the pervasive social sickness of American successfulism, which makes the current COVID crisis pale in sickly comparison, conspires to keep the work that traveling across boundaries and division in our midst can do from cultivating and fertilizing the hearts of our collective soul. I've noticed when the word capitalism or capitalist comes up, immediately most start to get defensive. Many do, bristling up inside at the very sound, American capitalism, as if an attack on that which their body and mind worship is imminent. A wall starts to form up, conversation gets curt, closing down, unwilling to admit that undeniably broken parts of America's machinery and culture need fixing. A desire for silence, complicity, betrayal. And yet as Christians or moralists or even simply as citizens, how are we being when our voices are not speaking up now? How are we being when our actions are not speaking out now? Indeed, how gravely we betray our fellow humans, all of them, when we acquiesce now, when we say nothing. It's only by going inside, by having the courage and safeguarding the time to live in prayer, to reflect for ourselves on how we are being, on what we are taking in from, not just seeing during our life's travels, that we might dismantle prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness that exist inside of ourselves. John the Baptist, living in prayer, both spoke up for what he thought was right. When Jesus came to be baptized, I need to be baptized, you. And do you come to me? He spoke out. But he brought it inside. And Jesus said, it's proper to do this to fulfill all righteousness. And John, taking the outside in, taking it inside out, he did. An example of life in prayer. At Riverside in 1967, Dr. King confessed, I must be true to my conviction that I share with all men the calling to be a son of the living God. Beyond the calling of race or nation or creed is this vocation of sonship and daughtership, brotherhood and sisterhood. And because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children, I come tonight to speak for them. This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers and sisters. On love, he said, when I speak of love, I'm not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm not speaking of that force which is just emotional bosh. I'm speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door, which leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about the ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of John. Let us love one another, for love is God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. If we love another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us. The attacks were wrong, period. Let us love the attackers. Liz Cheney said, there has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. The president's action, inciting, were wrong. His actions have been repeatedly wrong, period. Let us love him. Undeniably, our systems continue to discriminate unjustly, period. The imperative to address our nation's original sins and abolish the pervasive and systematic oppression of those who fall outside of the white American hegemonic culture continues to cry out for action, calling louder to us today than any other time in many of our lives. We pray for, we love all those in government and positions of power, especially those who actively resist necessary change. Regarding Vietnam, Dr. King said, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. But we must move on. Let us be love in action. Perhaps especially in the midst of uncertainty, we as a nation are experiencing now. It's never been more critical, to quote our beloved Dolly Cardwell, that we get, quote, busy taking the next step. Being love in action. For men tied fast to the absolute, bled of their differences, drained of their dreams, this is Lillian Smith, by authoritarian leeches, drained of their dreams by authoritarian leeches until nothing but pulp is left. Become a massive, sick thing whose sheer weight is used ruthlessly by ambitious men. Here is the real enemy of the people, our own selves dehumanized into the masses. And where is the David who can slay this giant? One day I realized that each of us has to find this David within him or herself. It's a job, like breathing, that no one else can do for us. And yet, I know too that as each discovers afresh the person within him, as sculptors and painters, dancers and writers, the poets and the prophets, and the scientists put down in their unique ways what they find, the search grows easier for everyone. It is this, the individual's task, yes, but it is also this generation's, our world's historic mission to find and set up in a place the human being revealed in his manifold differences and infinite possibilities for all to see, to be exalted by, and to identify with. And so it is with us, Lynchburgians, Virginians, Americans, humans, divine beings. We each are David. And we depend inextricably in each other as well. Love in action. Love in action. Gordon Cosby, in a long sermon on agape love, said this: love simply says, I want to be with you. That's what Camp Kumbaya always said to me. That's what Church of the Covenant said to me. As I've looked back on the power of my experience with our beloved community, with Camp Kumbaya, our beloved community for children, I've realized it's love, a desire to be with, that has made all the difference. A place to give space for children of all backgrounds to be together, to feel a sense of belonging, to share the joy of becoming together outside. I want to be with you, being, belonging, becoming together, love in action, building Habitat for Humanity homes with God's people in need, with God's people in need, not for them, love in action. Sharing food from the food pantry with those in need, regardless of their story, not giving it to them. Love in action. Like the three wise men who listened to a dream. The three wise men, they listened to their dream. And it didn't go back to Herod. Instead, they returned by another route. They returned by another route. Love in action. In my personal experiences with Camp Kumbaya across almost 43 years, in being with the love of this community, learning from the love, spewing out from Church of the Savior, and most importantly, having been struck routinely again and again by the divine in being with others. I'm sure you too can say, mine eyes have seen the glory, the coming of the Lord. For he has come by here. She has come by here. He's no stranger in our midst. She speaks to us. She speaks through us, in us, all the time. He's Tracy down on Taylor Street. She is baby girl down on Harrison Street. She was the beautiful little 5-year-old girl playing in the baby pool fountain in 1985. Hair carefully plaited for camp and adorned royally with the colorful little beads as the mid-morning sun glistened oblique on the horizon through the fountain water, slipping through her tiny little camper hands. He was the 11-year-old. He was the 11-year-old Tinbridge Hill boy who had never personally known a white person. 11 years, had never personally known a white person who he said, quote, cared about him in Lynchburg in the 70s until he came to camp and met Bev Cosby. He was Bev. He was Martin. She is you. He is you, each of you. She's come by here so many times, and for that, we're so grateful. For that love manifest, we have been so blessed. Indeed, the beloved community has manifested in many moments and places. It ebbs and flows, it shifts and it travels in its breadth and presence. I want to close simply with two examples where in my life I personally felt the beloved community manifest in our city of Seven Hills. They both occurred at Lynchburg High School, Lynchburg High. Many of you know it. Many of you have been there. Some of you went to school there, potentially. Lynchburg's formerly all-white high school. The first time I went there, I was with Bev. After camp one day as a counselor, he took me all around the city and showed me all of the quiet little revolutions in love. Some of which I had known about, some of which I had been a part of, so many of which I had never heard of. And humbly, he took me touring around the city, and we ended at Lynchburg High School, and we walked in. We got out of his old gray car, and we, on the side there, parallel parked on Park Avenue, and there was a man in a wheelchair who treated Bev like his favorite uncle, the most loving and caring uncle that he'd ever had in his life. We walked up the stairs, and little old Granny there treating Bev as if they were the closest of siblings. All through the hallways into the old gymnasium throughout Lynchburg High School, the formerly all-white high school of our city. The beloved community manifests so palpably, so rich and present in the relationships, in the connectedness of being with that Bev sowed the seeds for, personally there. The second instance was at Lynchburg High School. Many of you were there. Many of you were part of the service. At Bev's funeral, his celebration of life, rather. I came down from Charlottesville where I was in graduate school, and it was overflow seating, literally. I can't remember. It felt like I must have gone up a gazillion flights to this room that was overfilled with people loving. It was a fuzzy little TV, and we were able to see the service that was in the gymnasium, I believe, and the overflowing power of the beloved community manifest, uncomparable in experience across my short 43 years. And yet, its opposite manifests too in our midst. In this season of Epiphanies, let us recommit to taking the next steps. The next step and the next step and the next. Let us live in prayer, working with our hearts, not just our minds, going in, not just out, in every moment. Let us love in action, heeding the call to serve our brothers, not our bank accounts. Serving agape love up to the community, not feeding the sickness, conspiring with the sickness of American successfulism. Let us manifest the beloved community in each and every step we take together and cultivate a world characterized by being, belonging, and becoming together.